Chronic spontaneous urticaria, or chronic hives with no known cause. It's so unpredictable. It's like playing pinball. Itchy, red bumps start on my arm, then my back. Sometimes my legs. Hives come out of nowhere. And it comes and goes. But I just found out about a treatment option at treatmyhives.com. Take that, chronic hives. Learn more at treatmyhives.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I tell you true crime stories involving military members and veterans, all with one goal in mind, to remind you to remain vigilant always. Today's case occurred 2 weeks after I launched this podcast on Veterans Day in 2019, and I remember being absolutely horrified by the news that a Marine veteran shot at his estranged wife's car, loaded up with not only his estranged wife, but also with his mother-in-law and his 3 kids all sitting in the back seat. Because the tragedy ended in a murder-suicide, I never really kept up with the case. But it recently came to my attention that this case has spurred actual change in the laws as they relate to victims of domestic violence, at least in the state of Washington. So it's with that in my heart that I bring you this episode. And I don't typically title my episodes anything, but I wanted to title today's episode, She Did Everything Right, the case of Tiffany Hill. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
It's a little after 3 p.m. on November 26, 2019. It's 2 days before Thanksgiving. It's a crisp, ordinary afternoon in Vancouver, Washington. In the parking lot of Sarah J. Anderson Elementary School, 35-year-old Tiffany Hill sits in her minivan with her 3 children in the back seat and her mother, Aria, in the passenger seat. School just let out, and they were planning to celebrate a special day. Tiffany's middle child had just turned 5. But what should have been a very joyful, routine school pickup was about to turn into a nightmare. As Tiffany chats with her mom, she suddenly freezes. Through the windshield, she spots someone striding towards her car. It's her estranged husband, 38-year-old Keland Hill. Tiffany's heart drops. She had done everything she could to get away from this man. There was a restraining order in place. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her or the school. But there he was, closing in. Aria would later recall the haunting moment. Quote, "We were in the car, we saw him, and we said, 'Keland?' Before anyone could react, Keland raises a semi-automatic handgun and opens fire. The windshield explodes into a spiderweb of shattered glass as bullets tear through the minivan. Inside, chaos erupts. Aria throws herself toward her daughter, trying to shield her from the gunfire. She recalls that it happened so fast. She says, quote, "All I know is the windshield was breaking and I tried to shield her. That's when I got hurt," end quote. Despite the screams from his own children sitting in the back seat, Keland keeps shooting. Tiffany is hit multiple times. Aria takes 3 bullets herself, but she refuses to stop protecting her daughter. In the back seat, Tiffany's kids are screaming, forced to watch their father attack their mother in cold blood. Miraculously, not one of the children are hit with a bullet. Within seconds, the entire ordeal is over. Tiffany slumps in the driver's seat, gravely wounded. Aria is bleeding, but she's alive. The children are hysterical. And Keland, well, he's calmly walking back to his car. He gets in and speeds away. It's broad daylight, everyone. It's 3 p.m. Parents and children nearby are ducking for cover. Everyone is frozen in disbelief. Someone calls 911 as the school goes into lockdown. Adults rush to help Tiffany's kids out of the van. The scene is chaos, a horrifying act of domestic violence unfolding in the most public of places. Police soon swarm the area and they spot Keland's vehicle, and a short chase ensues through the streets of Vancouver. It all ends at the busy intersection of Andreessen Road and Paddon Parkway. There, surrounded by officers, Keland steps out of his car. Before they can move in, he turns the gun on himself. One final act of control. And then he pulls the trigger. Back at the school, Aria is bleeding and in shock. She begs for help for her daughter. Paramedics rush both women to the hospital, but despite desperate efforts, Tiffany's injuries are too severe. The 35-year-old mother of 3 is pronounced dead. Her mother survives, but she faces a long, painful recovery, both physically and emotionally. And Tiffany's 3 young children, all under the ages of 8, they walk away without a scratch, yet they lose both parents within minutes, one murdered and one dead by suicide. It's the kind of horror that no child should ever witness. A mother gunned down by the man that she once trusted, their father, outside of an elementary school in front of dozens of people. But as shocking as that moment was, the people closest to Tiffany, they weren't surprised that Keland did this. Tiffany herself had feared exactly this outcome. She tried again and again and again to protect herself, but the system failed her. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we need to talk about who Tiffany was and the many warning signs that came long before that day. Tiffany Hill wasn't just a name in a headline. She was a Marine veteran, a devoted mother, a daughter, sister, and a friend. Strong, disciplined, and selfless, Tiffany embodied everything a Marine stands for. Her family described her as a warrior, not just because she served her country, but because she lived her life with courage and compassion. Her mother said that Tiffany would drop everything to help someone in need. By 2019, Tiffany was raising 3 young children, all under the age of 8, and she adored them. Friends say that she was an incredible mom, nurturing, playful, and fiercely protective. Beneath her tough Marine exterior was a soft heart, especially when it came to her kids. Tiffany's story begins on the East Coast. She grew up in New York, surrounded by a tight-knit family, including her mom, Aria, and her sister, Tabitha. Even after joining the Marine Corps and starting her own life, Tiffany stayed close to her mom and her sister. After leaving the military, Tiffany eventually settled in Vancouver, Washington, just across the river from Portland, Oregon. It was supposed to be the perfect place to raise her 3 kids with her husband, Keland Hill. From the outside, Tiffany's life looked full. A proud veteran, a loving mom, a stable home. But behind closed doors, Tiffany was fighting a private war, one against her own husband. And the truth is, no matter how strong, how disciplined, or how capable someone is, domestic abuse is not something you can simply fight your way out of. Tiffany tried. She prayed things would get better. She hoped love and time would fix what was broken in her marriage. At first, she hid the abuse well. Even her closest friends didn't realize how bad things had become. One fellow Marine later said that Tiffany was fiercely private, that she carried her pain quietly, like she'd been trained to do in the Marines. But by late 2019, Tiffany had reached her breaking point. She was done. She'd made plans to move back to New York with her kids to start over somewhere safe. That's why her mom, Aria, was in Washington when the shooting happened. She was there to help her daughter pack up the kids and leave. But if you've listened to me before, you know this one thing. For victims of domestic violence, the most dangerous time for them is when they're trying to leave and the year that follows. And Tiffany was right in that danger zone. So, who was Keland Hill? He was 38 years old, a few years older than Tiffany. The couple had met in the Marine Corps, both deployed overseas, and like many relationships that start during deployment, things moved quickly, fast, intense, and at least in the beginning, all full of hope. And the thing about this story is that Tiffany wouldn't have built a life with this man if there weren't at least a few good times. But beneath those good moments, there were signs of something much darker. And it wasn't until after Tiffany's death that the full picture came into focus. A few years before moving to Washington, the Hill family lived in North Carolina. And while they were there, Keland was arrested for attempted murder. That's right, attempted murder of Tiffany. But the thing is that Tiffany didn't pursue those charges. And without her cooperation, prosecutors had no case, and the charges were dropped. Later, Tiffany would indicate that Keland had somehow convinced her to drop the charges, which, by the way, is another chapter in the cycle of abuse. And that cycle continued. There were arrests in North Carolina, in Maryland, and later Washington, each time Tiffany giving Keland another chance, or she was at least trying to start over somewhere new. And each time, the violence continued. Friends described Keland as charming on the surface, the kind of man who could disarm people with just a simple smile. But the thing about this is that many abusers are charming. But behind closed doors, this big kind of guy who maybe reminded you of a teddy bear, he was much darker. Tiffany said that he was massive. He weighed over 300 pounds. And not only, was he just a big guy, but she described that he used his body as a weapon against Tiffany. And Tiffany was a small woman. She wasn't very large. And it's interesting when she says she not only fears him, but she fears what he can do to her with his body. His physical presence alone felt to her like a threat. Well, by 2019, Tiffany had finally left Keland and she was living separately with the kids. That's when Keland's behavior turned from controlling to downright dangerous. He began stalking her, making threats, and ignoring every boundary that the court set. Every survivor of domestic violence has a moment when something finally clicks, when the fear, the pain, and the exhaustion reach a limit. For Tiffany, that moment came on September 11th, 2019. That day, she and Keland got into an argument at their house. According to Tiffany's later statement to the police, Keland was furious because she didn't greet him properly when he walked in. I guess she forgot to say hi, or maybe she was mad, or whatever it was. Well, it sounds kind of trivial. Okay, you didn't say hi. But as is often the case, it was never really about the greeting. In that moment, Keland's rage exploded. In front of their children, Keland screamed at Tiffany. He went into the bedroom and began throwing her things out of the bedroom. That's when Tiffany tried to de-escalate the situation, and Keland grabbed her and slammed her against the wall in front of at least one of the kids. Tiffany tried to get away. She tried to call 911, but Keland chased her through the house, down the stairs, into the garage, ripped the phone right out of her hands, and continued to attack her. From this incident, Tiffany suffered a concussion and whiplash. When she finally could, she eventually called 911. Keland was arrested that same day for domestic violence assault and interfering with a 911 call. The following day, Keland appeared before a judge and was released on bail. A no-contact restraining order was sua sponte issued, forbidding him from contacting Tiffany or from possessing a firearm. Now, sua sponte just means that the judge did that without somebody requesting it. He just did that. Now, on paper, that sounds protective, right? A restraining order. But a restraining order is just that. It's paper. It only works if an abuser chooses to respect it, or if the system enforces it with urgency. And in Tiffany's case, neither happened. In Tiffany's case, the danger didn't end when the restraining order was signed. In fact, Keland started violating that restraining order almost immediately. Just 1 week after the assault, on September 19th, 2019, Tiffany returned to court to plead for continued protection. In her written petition, her fear is clear and chilling. Quote, "I fear for my life," end quote. Tiffany explained that after his arrest, Keland was angrier than ever, and he kept breaking the restraining order. He knew exactly how to get to her. She says, quote, "He knows the only way to get to me is through the children. I fear for my children's safety," end quote. I mean, it's haunting to read now because Tiffany was right. She predicted her own death on paper. She followed every rule. She documented everything. She reported every single violation and she begged for help. She did everything she was supposed to do. But the violations continued. On October 6, 2019, less than 3 weeks after he was released from bail and given the no-contact order, Keland walked into a Walmart across the river in Oregon and tried to buy a rifle. Because of the restraining order and his pending domestic violence charge, the background check flagged him, and the sale was denied. And you know what? I want to just say, thank goodness, that system worked, at least for that moment, right? But think about what that means. Keland was actively trying to arm himself. Tiffany had previously warned authorities that if he had a gun and got angry and drunk enough, he would definitely use it against me, end quote, she said. She knew exactly what he was capable of. Well, police were notified of his failed gun purchase, and that information was passed to local law enforcement. On paper, it was yet another red flag, another chance for the system to see just how dangerous this man really was. But he didn't get arrested again. And guess what? The stalking continued. On October 10th, Tiffany called police again. Keland had showed up at a restaurant where she was eating with friends. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her, but there he was, lurking, watching, just trying to grab some dinner, I guess. By the time deputies arrived to basically tell him to leave, he was gone. He'd been living out of his car, staying on the move to avoid capture. And then investigators found out how Keland had been tracking Tiffany so precisely. They searched her vehicle and they discovered an electronic GPS tracker hidden on her car. Now, that is next level stalking. Well, on November 7th, 2019, deputies finally found and arrested Keland. This time, the case landed with the Clark County Domestic Violence Prosecution Center, and prosecutors wasted no time conducting a formal danger assessment. Now, a formal danger assessment is a tool designed to measure the likelihood of lethal violence. Keland Hill scored 31. Now, to put that in perspective, anything over 18 means extreme danger. 31 was off the freaking charts. A senior prosecutor later said that Keland was a walking red flag, the very definition of high risk for homicide. So if everyone knew this, you might be wondering, why on earth was this man released from jail? Well, hang on, I'm going to tell you. Prosecutors now had this case, and they were alarmed by the mounting evidence, the repeated violations, the illegal gun purchase attempt, the GPS tracker, and that sky-high danger score. So with all this information, prosecutors begged the court to keep this man locked up. At a hearing a week later, they asked the judge to raise Keland's bail to $2 million cash. Tiffany herself, through the prosecutor, pleaded with the judge for them to set that high of bail. She told the judge, if this man gets out, I am a dead woman. And she was right. But the judge, John Fairgrieve of Clark County Superior Court, he didn't see it that way. He raised bail, right? Because it was originally at $75,000. So he raised it, but he only raised it to $250,000. That's 1/8 of what prosecutors requested. He would later tell reporters that domestic violence cases are difficult, that no two cases are the same, and that it's hard to know whether a threat is real or empty. He even said he considered Keland's financial means when setting bail. He claimed, quote, every decision has potential consequences. It's hard to predict when a threat is an empty threat or an actual threat, end quote. But come on, man. Tiffany's death proved this wasn't unpredictable. It was inevitable. So listen, because this guy's bail was set at $250,000, all Keland had to do was come up with 10%. 10% of $250,000 is $25,000, and all he had to do was put this up and he'd be free. And that's exactly what happened. On November 21st, 2019, a week before Thanksgiving, Keland Hill posted bail. After just 2 weeks in jail, he walked out a free man. Now think about that. 2 weeks. Do you think that Keland spent those 2 weeks in jail reflecting, regretting, asking God to forgive him? No. He was likely seething, furious that Tiffany had escaped his control. Before his release, Tiffany was notified, thankfully, and she was devastated. Authorities, however, handed her a handheld panic alarm. basically a button that she could press to alert police if he showed up. That was her protection, a simple panic button. Knowing the danger, Tiffany's mother, Oria, immediately flew from New York to Washington. She wanted to help Tiffany and the kids get back home, back to safety, once school let out for the holidays. But they never got the chance. On November 26, 2019, just 5 days after his release, Keland did exactly what Tiffany had predicted. In broad daylight, during school pickup, he gunned her down in front of her kids. And then, moments later, he turned the gun on himself. Witnesses described chaos. Parents screaming, teachers hurting kids inside, police flooding the parking lot. The staff at Sarah J. Anderson Elementary had actually trained for this exact scenario because they knew about the threats. You see, Tiffany, she was very involved in the school, and she had told them about everything that was going down with her ex-husband or her soon-to-be ex-husband. And that's how real this danger was, that Tiffany involved the school in, like a safety plan for her kids. As I indicated earlier, Tiffany's mom, Oria, was hit 3 times, but she did survive. She later remembered waking up after surgery, only to learn her daughter hadn't made it. That moment, realizing that Tiffany was gone, shattered her. News spread quickly across Vancouver. At first, the headlines called it an active shooter at an elementary school, which it was. But once details emerged, it became clear. This was domestic violence carried out in the most public of all places. And those closest to Tiffany, they weren't surprised. Law enforcement, advocates, even prosecutors, they all knew how volatile Keland was. Tiffany had told them over and over and over again that this would happen. In the days that followed, the Vancouver community rallied. Oria finished what she came to Washington to do. She packed up her daughter's home and took Tiffany's children back to New York. But instead of escorting Tiffany onto a flight to start a new life, Oria escorted her daughter's body home. Tiffany Hill was laid to rest in Brooklyn, New York, with full military honors. The Clark County Sheriff's Office covered expenses to return Tiffany home, and Alaska Airlines donated tickets so Oria and the children could travel. It was a rare and touching show of support, but of course, no act of kindness could undo what happened. 3 children lost both parents in the span of minutes. In Vancouver, candlelight vigils and memorial parades filled the streets. Cars lined up and they drove to the elementary school, leaving flowers, notes, and teddy bears. People vowed to remember Tiffany Hill and to fight for other women like her. And you know what? When you're loud enough, people listen. Tiffany's story quickly spread beyond Washington. True crime shows like Meet Mary Murder on Oxygen covered her case. Domestic violence advocates across the country began citing her story as an example of how badly the system can fail. And this was all because Tiffany didn't just fear her death, she predicted it. One person who took Tiffany's story personally was State Senator Linda Wilson, who represented the Vancouver area. Even before Tiffany's murder, Wilson had been pushing for a law that would allow real-time GPS monitoring of high-risk domestic violence offenders, with alerts sent directly to victims and law enforcement if an abuser came near. But until Tiffany's case, the proposal had stalled. After the shooting, Senator Wilson said, "Enough is enough." She joined forces with Tiffany's family, friends, and local police to push the bill through, determined that Tiffany's death wouldn't be in vain. By early 2020, the legislation was renamed the Tiffany Hill Act. It moved quickly through the state legislature. Lawmakers from both parties were united. This had to change. And guess what? The Washington State Senate passed it unanimously. And by March of 2020, the House followed suit. On April 2nd, 2020, Governor Jay Inslee signed the Tiffany Hill Act into law. It was a bittersweet moment. Tiffany's friends, family, and members of her community stood by as the governor's pen hit the page. But they all knew that this law carried Tiffany's name because she hadn't survived. Senator Wilson later said, quote, "The people who knew Tiffany best were determined to help others avoid what she had to go through. I intend for them to receive the recognition they deserve," end quote. And with that, she credited Tiffany's loved ones and even staff at the elementary school for turning heartbreak into action. So, what exactly does the Tiffany Hill Act do? Simply put, it gives judges the power to order 24/7 GPS monitoring for high-risk domestic violence offenders and connects that monitoring to a live alert system for the victim. This is what it would look like. If someone like Keland Hill is released on bail or even has a restraining order placed on them, a judge can require them to wear a GPS ankle bracelet, kind of like someone does even when they're on house arrest. That device then constantly tracks that person's movement. The victim, like Tiffany, would have an app on her phone linked to that tracker, but she wouldn't be stalking him. It would just be linked, right? If the offender comes within a certain distance, say a few miles or even a few blocks of the victim or any protected places like the home, work, or the kid's school, then the system immediately sends an alert to the victim and to law enforcement. It's like creating a moving zone of protection, a virtual fence that travels with the victim. Wherever she goes, if the abuser crosses that line, an alarm sounds. I mean, this is amazing. Had this technology existed for Tiffany in November of 2019, she might have received a warning that Keland was approaching the school before he ever reached her van. Maybe she could have run. Maybe staff could have locked down the school faster. It's not a perfect shield, but sometimes seconds are the difference between life and death. As Senator Linda Wilson said, the law adds action beyond the words on a paper restraining order. It actually turns protection from an idea into enforcement. Of course, though, passing a law is one thing. Implementing it is another beast. Each county in Washington had to figure out logistics. Who would monitor offenders? Who would pay for this? How will alerts reach victims in real time? By mid-2021, Clark County, which was Tiffany's own community, they had become the first county in Washington to actually launch the program. They partnered with a company called 2 Watch Monitoring to handle the ankle bracelets and notifications. It started small, but by August of 2021, 6 high-risk offenders were on GPS supervision. But even with those few, police said it made a difference. The Vancouver police chief called it technology that saves lives. Across the rest of Washington, though, progress has been very slow. 2 years after the law passed, a statewide investigation found that most counties hadn't used it at all. Only Clark County had fully implemented the program. Many cited cost as the barrier. Monitoring costs roughly $15 to $20 a day, and the offender is supposed to be responsible for paying that fee. But when defendants can't afford it, some courts are hesitant, either unwilling to shoulder the expense or uncertain how to begin. Some rural areas of Washington state didn't even realize that they had an option for this type of monitoring. It's frustrating to say the least because a law unused is a law that can't protect. As of this recording, 6 years after Tiffany's murder, Clark County remains the model. Their system is working. Victims there receive real-time alerts, giving them a measure of peace that Tiffany never got. One local survivor, State Representative Laura Davis, credited this exact technology with keeping her alive and sane, and she's now fighting to expand it statewide. Tiffany Hill's story isn't just another true crime case. It's actually a call to action. Domestic violence thrives in silence, behind closed doors. Tiffany tried to shine a light. She called police, she filed reports, she begged for help, and still, she wasn't fully heard until it was too late. We can't let that continue to happen. If someone you know confides in you that they're scared of their partner, believe them. Help them connect to resources and speak up. Because even someone as strong and supported as Tiffany struggled to get out safely. So imagine how hard it is for those who have less. Tiffany's case is heartbreaking, yes, but it's also motivating. Her death sparked real change, a law that can save lives, and that change can't stop there. We have to share Tiffany's story, and if you can, support your local domestic violence shelter. Push lawmakers to fund GPS monitoring in your state if they don't have it. That's how we keep Tiffany's voice alive and loud, how her final warning becomes someone else's lifeline. Because Tiffany Hill was more than a victim. Tiffany Hill was a Marine, a mother, a daughter, and a warrior. And even in death, she's still fighting to protect others. True Crime Army, thank you so much for joining me for another episode. I know that Tiffany's case really stuck with me, and I know that it's going to stick with you as well. Search out your local domestic violence shelters and find out how you can get involved. And remember, if your state is in the process of trying to pass a similar act to the Tiffany Hill Act, see how you can support it and how you can get involved. All right, everyone, my sources for today's episode include numerous news reports and official records, including reports by OPB, which is the Oregon Public Broadcasting, KATU News, and KGW News, as well as Clark County Today and state legislature records. And I did watch that documentary on Tiffany Hill called Me, Mary, Kill. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.